we can get it going. Okay, welcome. Welcome to Trainer Talk. I'm Dr. Rebecca Jorgensen, and I'm so happy to welcome you here and our guest, Dr. Robert Allan. Hi, Robert. So glad to have you.
I'm very happy to be here.
So let me just introduce you, Robert, a minute to our EFTers here. You are an very experienced educator and trainer, and you've been specializing in counselor, therapist, learning and development for many years. You're assistant professor at the University of Colorado in Denver, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and a professional counselor in Colorado. You moved from Canada a few years ago to Colorado, but you've already rebuilt a therapy practice, have a supervision practice. And then what we're really focusing on today is an area that you've been researching as part of your professorship and your interest in research. And you've done a lot of publications in peer-reviewed journals and presenting at conferences on the process of EFT for couples and efficacy of EFT, and specifically more around cultural kinds of issues, which is what we're going to be talking about today. How we as therapists kind of be more aware about how to reach our clients, I think, is really what we're going to be talking about today. So welcome. It's very exciting to have you here with us. And let me just say also to those of you who are here with us, please say hello in the chat box. Let us know where you're from. It's great for us to see and hear from you while Robert and I are talking, because you are why Robert and I are meeting, so that we can answer your questions and help you while you're integrating your EFT work. So please say hello in the chat box, and we'll try to respond to any questions that you have, and hopefully you can hear us as well. So just put something in the chat box so we know you're there and you're listening. We need ARE from you as well, so we'll watch for that. Hopefully folks will respond. Hi, Kate. Great. So people are starting to sign in a bit, Robert.
That's great.
So Robert, maybe we could just start a little bit with saying a little, what brought your interest to looking at meeting couples who maybe are culturally different than us, right?
A wide variety of things. One is there's so much great work being done by EFT therapists all over. And in conversation with people at summits and online groups, meetings, trainings, hearing about all the great work that they do, I thought it would be really, really important to start documenting that. And so that was a big driver for me, coming in a context where students ask a lot of questions about who is EFT for, and does it work better for some couples than others? And we're sort of inside the family, right? We know EFT works in a wide variety of settings with a wide variety of couples. But it's important to find ways to communicate that and to document that and to share that. So that was a big driver for me. And then the other thing is a part of my own experience when I first did the externship with Sue. Like many, I absolutely fell in love with EFT and absolutely fell in love with Sue. And at the same time, as I was going through the training, there was a part of my brain somewhere that was I'm curious, because I was thinking about my own practice and my own life. And I was thinking about like, so I mean, like, I wonder how this works when I'm working with a same-sex couple, or I wonder how this works when a couple comes from a different culture, or I wonder what it's like when I'm working with a couple who are dealing with the daily stressors of racism, or like all of those things. And I was, as I said, I know people are doing great EFT work in all of those and many more settings. And so that was something that I thought was really important to kind of look at and document as well.
Yeah, that first initial, I can remember when I first started to train internationally, and people would ask those kinds. Of course, they do that in the U.S. as well, but especially pronounced in an international setting where I'm coming as this white woman to some other culture where I don't even have the language, and somebody's translating for me or something, and like, how does this work for us? And my response is EFT works because we're learning the culture of every couple. We're learning what their intersubjective responses are, how they're making meaning. So we're like trying to meet them where they are. But if I didn't address that, when I addressed that question, answered it that way, I people kick back against that. Like, how is that possible? Or now you're dismissing my experience in some way. So it's a dilemma, because once we're in, we really actually know that of course we're going to make adaptations for every couple, and that EFT teaches us how to do that. But maybe there's also some benchmarks or markers that we need to be aware of so that we can help people with their inner experience of being met when it comes to differences, when like I'm a tall white woman and I'm meeting somebody that's little and of color. And I remember one person saying to me, "You remind me of so and so," and I knew from talking to their individual therapist that so and so was abusive to them. So those are kind of the thoughts I have as you're just talking about what brought you interest to it, because there is that other part that gets afraid and says, wait, what about me? Or how do I fit? Or can I really belong here and help people here who are different?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's such it's so interesting because the language I use is adaptation, and sometimes people are like, "Whoa, are we talking about changing EFT here?" And I actually think the model holds everything that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And we're just finding ways to broaden that discussion.
And maybe to broaden ourselves so we can meet the diversity that we face and open our own blind spots a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a function for me. The academic literature has the words cultural adaptation in the literature. So I'm, part of my livelihood is about getting a few pubs out every year. So in some ways, there's an ethic, sort of a bit of a, making my life a little easier for 1 millisecond by using that word. But it's not about adapting the model. It's about, I really appreciate that, Becca. It's about adapting ourselves and understanding ways in which we're stretching and expanding the model itself to meet couples where they are.
Yeah, I have to give some credit to a supervisor, Jamie Bachman, Jamie, I believe you're on with us.
Yes.
He and I've had many of these kinds of conversations, and also his own expertise in working with minority cultures and finding and helping us to kind of grow and expand, so that, because the model, I think, as you said, doesn't really need to be adapted per se, that it's our ability to work with particular populations. Hi, Jamie. I see him responding. Yeah, so with that, that's great. It's a great caveat to remember for us just to say, it's not so much that we're adapting EFT. It holds all the pieces. The model's amazing that way, that we're meeting people, but our ability to not get stuck and to widen ourselves. And then, yeah, so let's just go through. I think it's just a great way to kind of remember as we're going through that adapted is part of trying to meet the literature and change some of the literature and the way people within the profession are able to see how our experiential practice does do justice here to folks who haven't had justice done really with them.
Maybe. Right. Yeah. That's a great way to frame it. I think one of the kind of really important pieces is our capacity to focus experientially on sort of what's happening in the room gives us tremendous insight and a tremendous ability to get close to and work with and help reshape those interactions. And part of it is just like understanding that what kind of is in the room. When you have a couple, sometimes people are bringing a whole lot with them, right? Yeah. They're bringing decades of experience with them that is affecting that moment, right? So I really appreciate that, how you noted the issue of justice. And so sometimes, people are going to have an experience in the moment that is profoundly impacted by decades of experience that have happened outside of the room.
Yes, for sure. And we that awareness for us when we feel that, like that attunement around, like they leave, they kind of leave the room or this old stuff really forwards in. That's one of the ways that our awareness needs to be increased, that I think you're going to be talking about today.
Okay. Should I launch into it?
Yeah, it'd be great.
Okay. So I think you all have these slides. We did load them. I'm going to, Becca, I'll look for your help in terms of timing and just sort of moving along a little bit as well.
Okay.
We've already talked about sort of the first maybe 10 slides. You did a brilliant introduction, Becca. So I'm just going to scroll along here. And as I said, I think you all have the slides. So if it feels like I'm going too quickly, I believe you can download a PDF of all the slides and you have them there.
Yeah, I think let us know if you don't see them, but there is a file share and this PDF that Robert has shared his screen to walk through some of the high points of it with us is there. You ought to be able to download it.
So another piece that kind of has influenced part of why the research work of interest to me is that we know from looking at individual approaches to therapy that culturally adapted work is actually more effective. So some of it's really simple, like some of it's like things like language and making sure that you're using words that people know. Some of it has, depending, because we're talking about cultural adaptation, we're talking about such a broad range of things. But when they take specific models of therapy, which they've only done with individual approaches in therapy, and culturally adapted for specific populations, they actually find they're more effective. And that research is growing. I'd say there's been a great amount of work done around evidence-based practices over the last 30, 40 years, including with EFT, and I think we're seeing a growing amount of research saying all these great practices need to make sure that they're effective with a wide range of populations.
So this is one of the things that, cognitively we can go, that it can be helpful to know some main things. Like when I go to New Zealand, I know not to sit on a table, right? Because I lose everyone. if I sit on a table because it's considered so rude. There's some things that it's kind of helpful to have a knowing about so we're not triggering particular experiences in our clients, or that we could at least be open to asking about, but that we don't want to get so caught up in kind of, knowing it's kind of global clusters of things, I think, right, when it comes to this cultural adaptation that of awareness that we need to have.
Yeah, that's such a great example. Like, there's all these kind of specifics that I think are enormously helpful. And at the same time, what I will add to it, which I don't know if I'll have time to it, but at the end of the slides, there's a bit of an outline that I have about a multicultural orientation, because I think that that knowledge set is really important. I did not know that about New Zealand. Thank you for letting me know that. It's really important to know. And then it's kind of like a process as well. Like,
Right.
we will just simply never, ever, ever know everything about everything. But we
We
can,
could get really stuck trying to do all of that.
right, but we can kind of, put ourselves in a situation where we kind of, much like EFT, that we see it as a process.
Yeah.
And that there are ways that we can set our work up in a way that allows us to find ways to integrate and adapt and work with couples. And in many ways we do. Like, every couple is a different culture.
Yeah.
And so, again, I think that there's ways that that kind of EFT kind of sets us up for that. Everyone here will know about the EFT research, and kind of what has been done. I mean, I think it's interesting. My students ask this, and I actually do not know the answer to why. But, most couple research has been done with white, middle-class, heterosexual couples. I know that there's one sample coming out of Ontario that's going to begin to emerge that was done with Family Services Association, which is going to be really important. But there's just a lot of research across approaches that have been done with white, middle-class, heterosexual couples. I'm not quite sure why that is. It's good research, tells us a lot. And, we want to, as ISEFT is doing, want to begin to expand on that as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I did, along with a colleague here, Shruti Polson, and with the help of a student, Caitlin Edwards, we did an online survey, and sent it out as broadly as possible and repeatedly. If anybody online completed it, thank you very, very much. We really appreciate that. And today we've done 23 interviews after the survey to kind of follow up, and so to get a little more detail and response. I'm going to go through the numbers stuff and fairly quickly. I know it might be a real interest. Again, you all have this. So if it seems like I'm going quickly, I know I am, because I do want to get to kind of some of the things that people actually said.
Yeah. So I think I maybe didn't emphasize it well enough, Robert, that you have done some research with EFTers about what we are doing to try to be more inclusive around diversity and recognize more of the intersubjectivity problems that we face with some of our couples.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, people are doing amazing work. So 258 people has responded initially, and we lost some folks along the way for a variety of reasons. And so there's like a set of questions, and some people kind of just stopped answering. So we get down to 228 who got to the question, do you make adaptations in your work for cultural considerations? And 180 said they did. So that's about 80%. Our sample was primarily identified as female, primarily identified as heterosexual, and most of the respondents were white. and most respondents came from the United States. Largest in terms of profession was marriage and family therapists, but a little more distribution there as well. Of the respondents, 47% had completed core skills, and 35% of them indicated that they use EFT almost all the time. So as I mentioned, almost 80% said that they do adapt emotionally focused couple therapy for cultural considerations. Of those people who said they didn't make any adaptations, we got to a point where in the survey where then it was like, what do you make adaptations, yes or no? So if you said yes, it opened up another part of the survey and a whole series of questions. If you said no, then it went to thank you very much. Can you please tell us why? And so these are the kind of answers from the 20% who said that the need for attachment was universal. It's all about attunement. Using EFT techniques is enough. That they're not aware of how to make adjustments, and that their population's not diverse. And we will get to that question, Becca, in terms of if you adapt, what do you do? So that was like the rest of the survey. You're right. Very, very good at kind of setting up and framing all of this. So, for example, one respondent who talked about working with minority groups in Australia said that during assessment, they explore whether an individual sees their model self as different from others. During formulation, they occasionally people carry trauma and wounds from feeling their differences. And in terms of interventions, they talked about, I like to slow down processing model self and model of others when I get to stage 2 to check if their perceptions are affecting the couple relationship. So thinking about it in attachment frame and view of self and view of other and how that works. Of that, almost 80% who said they do make some kind of adaptation. 85% said that they make changes to the attachment history. So one respondent said, with South Asian couples, I'm open to arranged marriages and want to hear the story of the shaping of their attachment after the betrothal. I also want to know if there's been a secret loves or crushes in the past, and have they been able to grieve this attachment loss and so move on. Another respondent said, in working with a lesbian couple, I make sure to explore coming out stories, the possible impact of internalized homophobia and the impact of homophobia in the world.
Such great responses for people to recognize how their openness and leads to a deeper understanding, right? And alliance, like yes. Being able to ask those kinds of questions following those possible injuries or what's been really difficult in their growing up or in their life.
Yeah.
Really can add so much to the alliance of that, just having that awareness to ask those questions.
That's such a great point, Becca, about the alliance, because I think for some folks, like some of us are kind of used to going about in the world in a way where we adapt and we make it okay for other people. So we're not, we're not gonna remind people of things that they might be saying or doing that could be challenging in some way, whether it's racial or sexual orientation, or like we're just kind of move about in the world in a way that kind of keeps us safe and minimizes the negative impact of things. And so when we get in the therapy room, it's really important for the therapist to kind of take the lead, right, and say, no, I actually really want to know about you. I really want to know about what your experience is, not only in this relationship, but I really want to know about what your experience is in the world. Because if I'm going to be helpful for you as a couple, I really need to know you. Right? And so I love that, what you say about how that contributes to the therapeutic alliance.
It creates so much more safety if you have that kind of alliance, because then when they have, especially in stage 2, which I imagine you'll be getting to, I guess I'm having a tendency to jump ahead of you too much. So,
Perfect. You're like
when
setting.
they've got this, you know, different parts of their own experience that are in conflict, which we are so much working within stage 2 to bring those disowned aspects or aspects of self that are in conflict with each other, to be able to hold them together and share them with their partner. If we don't know those, we have to have the safety for that to be open, so that that can come emerge more into the room.
Right. Yeah, that's great. So another respondent mentioned that with attachment history questions, they ask about attachment history questions become immigration history questions. And then I ask more direct questions. Where were your folks in this? Who raised you? And then I get, yeah, it's an immigration, as in attachment is universal, but it looks different based on your immigration story. Another respondent said, what I do when I'm working with people that are from different cultures, even as two people like a gay couple, or even like a Chinese couple or an Indian couple, or if they're mixed, I spend 4 or 5 sessions really talking about culture. In the very beginning, we will spend an entire hour talking about one person's and then talking about the other person's culture. And then we will spend another hour talking about how was that and what did you learn? What did you want to know more about? It really generates a lot of conversation between the couple, and I try to keep that going for 2 or 3 more sessions after that. So in a way, kind of really sort of laying the foundation for ways in which that work can be, it's alliance building, absolutely, and lays the foundation for how it might be integrated into the work on an ongoing basis.
I always think about assessment, the assessment phase. Robert, this isn't so specific to our conversation, but the kind of more we can do an assessment that brings alive our awareness about tricky spots for each person that we're working with, the quicker we can get to the here and now process work, the less cloudy we get caught into the content cloud, right? The less that they have to kind of fill in and bring in their story that blocks the process work. So I think a thorough assessment really helps when we do get to the present process work, that people don't have to kind of go out to their heads and try to bring in the story as much.
Right.
Because we know them better. We have that sense of knowing them better.
Yeah, that's great. Another respondent said, in doing the attachment history assessment, I'm definitely looking closely at not just what did they get from their parents, but what did they get from their community in terms of messages about love and attachment and how they feel. I'll ask people about what ideas they've gotten from their communities, about autonomy and competence and belonging, and how being attached to one person in particular fits with those experiences and how those influence each other. So if you think of some of the, we often get exposed, I think, to sort of basics around individual versus collectivist cultures and ideas of, what role and what place your spouse has in the context of family or community. Obviously, this person who responded works some with folks and want to better understand the messages that they got around that. Another respondent said, I wouldn't even say I have formal questions that I could tell you that I asked, but certainly naming early on any unfamiliarity I have with their culture, and checking in with the client early on about how does that feel for them, and sharing my interest in learning from them, not just about their overall culture, but their experience in their culture. What does that mean to them? And what would be important to them for me to know or to be aware of in our work together? Also, in the early stage, is it possible for me to zoom in on the PDF and make it larger? Yes. That was easy. Also, in the early stage, sharing with them, I will most likely frequently be asking questions if I'm unsure, because I wouldn't want to make assumptions based on my own life context. Was that better, Jamie?
So yeah, it's much better.
Okay. Some of the assessment approaches that respondents mentioned, with members of the military, I'd be open to the place of PTSD and dampening the emotional experience. In First Nation peoples in Canada, I know we tend to say First Nations or Aboriginal. I know in the US that you say American Indian, Becca.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I know I said First Nations people when I first got here, and people were like, "What are you talking about?"
Well, when you go other places around the world, like Australia and New Zealand, they'll also talk as First Nation.
First Nation. Okay, great. Including additional attachment significant frames such as the broader social family base and connection to earth elements. And that's something coming up on my computer. One person talked about, we do it in 3 layers. Like
Oh, Robert, we say Native American.
Native American,
American.
not American Indian,
Yeah.
Native American.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm still learning American English. My latest learning was don't say point form. You have to say bullet points.
That's right. If you say point form, we have no idea what you're saying.
That's what I saw, just a blank room of faces. No idea what I was talking about. So this person talked about doing a genogram in 3 layers, how in your love relationship that you had before this one, what the love relationship to your parents, what did they show, how in your own love relationship you can find security and find the other. Are you there for me? That kind of interview to see the attachment history of a person. That's in there. But it comes easily in the case presentation of the core skills. I notice in core skills, I always ask for a 3-generation genogram. This is obviously a trainer who does that.
That's so interesting because that really is an adaptation of EFT or of an EFT assessment to bring a genogram in and adapt it to kind of what we're looking for. So that's pretty interesting. I wouldn't. My training was to do genograms, and I felt like it took me about 3 years to figure out I didn't need a genogram to do EFT assessment.
Right.
So there's some ways that we really can buff up our ways of teaching assessment so that it's consistent, I think.
Yeah, and this sounds like a real attachment history genogram.
It does. It's an attachment history. Yeah.
If I think about, when I worked in physical rehab, I used to do a genogram, but I used to often look at, physical illness was sort of one of those areas I would look at along with some mental health related things. So it kind of gives a bit of a focus to the genogram along with all the regular things that you do.
Yep.
Broaching, which you talked about in the introduction, so I won't spend too much time on. It didn't come from the respondents, but just this notion that we kind of, as you said in the introduction, Becca, you kind of lay out for people who you are, and that you want to know them and want to find a way to talk about all of those things. So some of the adjustments that people made to specific populations around sexual orientation. One respondent said they look at larger social attachment injuries. They look at coming out stories, even saying that even the best coming out stories likely traumatic, scary, or shameful. And also asking about HIV status, because couples don't often disclose issues related to or what the challenges are related to HIV status. One participant working with people who have migrated, they would ask, when you arrived in the US, how did that change your relationship with your family of origin? Are you still able to turn to your family of origin back in your original country of comfort? What does that look like? Asking about their story of migration. And asking the generational status, who migrated when? So have they been here for a while? Did their parents come, grandparents, understanding that? Did they come from a rural or urban setting originally, and the reason for migrating? And another respondent, looking at race and culture, said, how do you think your culture impacts your relationship now, your parents' relationship? What experiences have you had with racism or prejudice?
So some interesting ways that people are thinking about the questions that they ask during assessment to try to get a better felt sense of folks in their attachment relationships and their sense, because I think what we're always looking for is that emotional experience, right? So there's just these other ways, other kind of doorways into threat, abandonment, feeling deprived, or feeling supported.
Right. That's a great, I mean, it is within the attachment frame. I mean, it's interesting. I didn't, I have to remember where I am, page 11. I kind of breezed by it because we had covered so much of it. But, Bowlby himself wrote, when you look at an individual and try to understand what their attachment experience is, that we also need to look at the structure of the system, the environment that people operate in, that it does kind of, just as you said, Becca, does kind of impact people's sense of...
To me, as I listen to some of those questions that people are asking, if it's not held in the attachment frame, it's not so relevant, really, right? We have to be listening to the attachment and the emotional response.
Right. And those experiences can impact people's view of self and view of others.
Yeah, absolutely. So listening for that is really important as we ask those questions.
Yeah. So looking at formulation, one participant noted, but as a part of building alliance, they've always broached and talked about cultural differences in the room. Another participant noted that even when a couple is culturally similar, I explore differences in how they identify and behave. An Italian-American hetero couple, her sense of responsibility to their children and higher level of expressed emotion were experienced by him as withdrawal and pursuit, respectively. But for her, they are just Italian. She's offended that her commitment to him is doubted and tells him to be less needy. Another couple talked about not only with lesbian, bisexual, and transgender couples, but also with hetero couples too, that I always ask about, like, what are their arrangements? Whether they're married or not married, but what are their arrangements in terms of their commitment to sexual partners and everything? Yeah, asking, like, how does that impact the emotional connection, the safety? How do they talk about that? How does it get between them? So exploring what kind of arrangements and whether they are monogamous and how that impacts their connection.
Yeah, we have to know if we're going to, because those questions are pretty essential, that we don't make particular assumptions, because we're going to know that having fidelity to what their arrangement is, it's what's going to be emotionally important to them and their relationship.
Yes. Another participant talked about in Iran, it's not the same. Mother-in-law is a huge issue, and it works when I literally teach them, especially the men, the concept of differentiation, of self and others, boundaries. This is a system of your family of origin. You stepped out, meaning into the marriage. You formed a new system of you and your wife. So this system steps back, just one step, meaning the family of origin takes one step back. Don't get me wrong, one step. This should be your first priority, your wife. 99% of them were fascinated and accepted. It works, but I'm not sure if it is EFT, but I have to do it. So that's someone who is working with couples who come from really strong collectivist cultures, where family of origin, particularly for males, are going to take precedence, and trying to find a way to figure out how to carve out a space for the couple.
Right. And you know, there not that that doesn't work for that therapist, but there is there. The question is you know, how would we do that in a really EFT way, right? And where we might notice it and reflect it. That you know, when you came here and you joined this partnership, it's almost like you expect your partner to come into your family rather than to come closer to your partner and have your family there, you know, more on the sideline. So there'd be a way that we would do that probably to really reflect it, and because that's especially if that's the partner's complaint, right?
Yes, absolutely. And you know, this person talked about, you know, how the success that they've had is around kind of framing it as one step,
Yeah, that's
you
right.
know, and understand, you know, and trying to find a place for the couple relationship in that. So it's not like a,
And that's their dilemma as a couple, though, right? Is how to do that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so I won't get into sort of the detail of these results. But again, you all have these. And so just again, this is the 80, almost 80% who said, yes, we do make adaptations, and where they were most likely to make those adaptations in terms of the looking at the specific um, interventions and strategies that we use in EFT.
You know, Robert, Jamie had this really great response as we were talking about you know, the step back, this kind of cognitive structure or teaching that the therapist was kind of find successful but struggling a bit, like is this EFT. And I
Yes.
think so. Jamie's response is, how would we make sure we aren't enacting our values of the nuclear family, taking precedence over the family of origin? Then you know, so that's what we have to be careful of as the EFT therapist, right? That's what I was kind of trying to do when I say in an EFT way, we're going to frame this as their dilemma so that it's not us bringing our value onto them.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. That's a good, I mean, that's a good question because I don't kind of read that feedback as kind of like, okay, forget your family of origin. You're now married, it's a new family. But they had a way of sort of, this respondent had a way kind of recognizing and validating and knowing how important it is to maintain and be part of family of origin. And so not imposing that, but had a way of framing it that said it's way of framing it was to say
Yeah.
it's one step.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so in examples of empathic reflections and validating emotional realities, one respondent said, noted an example that they provided in terms of an empathetic reflection was, it sounds like your neighborhood has been really scary at times. So I can see how important it has been for you to have a hardened shell. Validating emotions and realities. Another respondent said, when working with an African American man, for example, I will keep in mind what prejudice he might face interacting with the world, and what he might, and that might be withdrawn due to family as well as societal expectation, and ways to keep himself safe. Another responded noted an example of an empathetic reflection. It sounds as if you feel alone and not part of the larger majority culture as a lesbian woman. And that only compounds the loneliness you feel with your partner. Another respondent offered an evocative response. How does your experience on the reservation affect how you feel when talking to your partner right here, right now? Validating emotions. This respondent offered in relation to working with an African American male client in a city that had a police shooting of an unarmed Black man. I would be likely to reflect the difficulty of expressing soft emotions for the males in their culture. Another participant offered an empathetic interpretation. not sure what an empathetic interpretation is, but I can see why you feel society is against you. It sounds like from your experience, the people you were told to trust don't have your best interest in mind. And I can really see how that could be so upsetting to you. So there's a number of other examples there. We go for another 13 minutes, correct, Becca?
Uh-huh.
And so there are a number of other examples there. I don't, there's a lot there to go through. When I've done these presentations before, it's like one of those introduce, talk, and so I do kind of want to jump ahead, if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
In terms of looking at culturally specific interventions.
It is. I do want to say, I hope people will read through those responses because it's so helpful, I think, and can be so informative to see some ways that our colleagues are expressing things. Because if we're not doing it, and we can always continue to learn ways of, we wouldn't think, right? Like if we don't have some experience with it or some modeling of it or have read it somewhere, there may be ways that we would never consider to frame or to hold something. So it's really helpful to see the languaging of that other people use.
Yeah, people are doing such great work. Like, I mean, that's the thing that just kind of keeps getting reinforced for me over and over again. So sort of thinking about sort of what it is that we can do as EFT therapists and how to integrate some of these understandings into our work. One is to externalize the trigger that's societal. So the issue is not something that belongs to them, but something that they have to deal with and making it part of the cycle. I have an example, but I won't get into that. Matching vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
People will express that in very different ways, and making sure that you match vulnerability, not kind of like going underneath them emotionally and going too deep, too quickly, is really important. Not pressuring people to name feelings. I think we have a fantastic frame in terms of understanding how to work with emotion. Magda Arnold's model, a way of processing and understanding, cue, rapid appraisal, physical experience, and the meaning we make from that. And then we also draw on Ekman's work around emotions. But people have a lot of ways of expressing emotion. We do want to assemble and make sense of and all of that, and that there's a wide variety of ways that people of having that. And I think the more we learn, I mean, I love this quote. It's my summer love of quote, is that emotional granularity is a bit like wine tasting. Emotions are so fine and detailed, and have a lot of specificity. And I like the analogy of wine tasting because it's kind of like about savoring and exploring and developing. And the more we do that as therapists, the more we develop a capacity to work with a wide range of emotions. So I think that that's really important.
Yeah, that's really, really to think about how emotions blend and how we can bring the richness of particular emotions alive and heighten them. There's a question here, Robert. Patricia asks how to deal with being challenged if we're not of a particular culture, and then maybe it's a block for us to understand because it's so out of our own range of experience.
Yeah. Well, you're doing it, Patricia. So I just really, really appreciate you're asking that question because we all have that. I'm constantly, working with people who are not from the same culture as me. So I just really, really appreciate that. The question, and I think you're doing it right now by asking the question, kind of opens up, such a wide range of possibility. And I think that there's, some kind of, sometimes it's helpful to scaffold our way into it, right?
Yeah.
And so have like some knowledge sometimes is helpful. So it's like whether it's books or movies or people, or experiences, we can go, we can read, see, talk, find ways to learn, and kind of have some sort of knowledge base that kind of scaffolds our way into
Mhm.
then an ongoing process, that will continue to learn and develop.
That's so important, Robert. I think, especially because we do want to learn from our clients, but the burden of them educating us about kind of broad in a broad context. I think this has been one of the kind of old traditional ways of looking at cultural adaptation, right? That's shifting now so that we're not, especially in EFT, that we're not trying to adapt EFT to a culture, but we're trying to adapt so that we can meet and understand, like Patricia is saying. So, but we don't, at the same time, we don't want the burden of all of that education to be on our clients. So what we can talk, share, read, and begin to understand in broad context is going to help inform us so we can be more experientially attuned, from having some sort of base.
Yeah, absolutely. So the examples of languages, I mean, there are languages that have words for emotions that we just don't have in English. And so sometimes people kind of they might have a way of talking about their experience, that the words we have in English, a single word might not encompass how they understand what their experience is.
Yeah.
Microaggressions, which sometimes it's something that kind of gets framed as like, it's bad, and it's not really helpful. It's not great, but what I would say is that they happen all the time, and it's really important. I think what's helpful is kind of recognizing and understanding that they might happen, and that it's what's important, and what we know from attachment, of course, is about repair.
Yeah.
And that we recognize and see, a therapeutic alliance where there has been successful repair is even better. Like when you go through a successful repair with a client, you have an even stronger therapeutic alliance.
Yeah.
And empathy, again, looking at what we can do from an EFT perspective, is an ideal model for repair.
So this idea about microaggressions, I think one of the things that as we attune more and more and listen, and like Ekman talks about micro expressions, right? That as we can be aware, we can make those repairs. So as we're watching for those micro expressions, then when they experience that we're off in some way, or there has been a rupture, that we can more quickly repair it.
I love that analogy, Becca. I'm just writing that down. Micro expressions, which we do, EFT does such a good job of outlining how we're like paying attention to that. And I think it's the same thing with microaggressions.
Because if there's a hit, if we're
well,
watching for the micro expression, they can't suppress it fast enough. We're going to see it.
right. That's great. Thank you. And talking about repair. We have 3 minutes left. There's a lovely section here on multicultural orientation, which I won't go too much into. Again, you all have the slide. What I really like about it is it's a process oriented. So instead of, the notion of competency, that we become culturally competent. So we go to a 1-day workshop and then we're culturally competent, or we go to a 10-day workshop and we're culturally competent, or whatever. So instead of seeing it like a finite something that you do once and then you're done, it offers more of a process-oriented approach.
That's so important, that we're continuing to learn and grow and be more responsive.
Yeah. I did want to mention briefly that along with a local colleague who's an EFT therapist and supervisor, Pam Semler, we've developed a workshop that we've been testing and trialing over the past year, called Becoming Culturally Accessible, Responsive, and Engaged, working with diversity in EFT, that we're going to offer for the very first time in Denver, January 11th and 12th.
Oh, exciting. That's great. So that goes to drrobertallan.com/new-events. Really cool. So let's just see, Robert, if anyone has comments or questions based on what we've been discussing. I can drop that link here into the chat box. So we can stop the screen share. There we go. So Latrice, not acknowledging your awareness, that transparency. So we think about how we can be transparent, like what we do or don't know, or that we don't know. We're obviously not from particular cultures, right? There's some obviousness but stating the obvious and making the implicit explicit, being transparent, those are some of our really good ways of opening. And that's the therapeutic stance that we're going to have in EFT. So that's really important to pay attention to that, and inviting them to fill us in, right? To help us when we've missed it. I think those are such important pieces of our therapeutic stance. Other questions or comments?
Just going to update you the link.
Okay, great.
O in my name.
Oh, did I spell your name wrong? Thank you. I sure did.
I usually get an E-N, so there's an extra E in there one way.
I'm just so used to typing Dr. Rebecca that I typed B-R-R-E-B.
Nice.
All right. So it's really fun to be able to consider what we don't know and our ways of knowing, and then how to bring that back into the attachment frame, and what doorways we can open, especially in the assessment, and then again at stage 2 work, how that's going to be so important when we're working with all of us, right? So that we're opening our blind spots, and we're trying to bring in these factors that are really important, especially as people are trying to de-escalate and then move into stage 2 work, so that their parts that may be in conflict with each other, internal experience of self, is so important, so that we can look about how their intrarelatedness impacts the interrelatedness with the couple.
Right, absolutely. People are doing it. I mean, sometimes there's this sense of it's something that's new or different. And I mean, yet another amazing thing about the EFT community is people are doing this work. and are doing it in really, truly amazing ways. Hopefully we'll kind of hear more and more of it, and find ways to, share and kind of integrate into our training and all of those things.
Yeah, and it's so helpful that we have each other as a community, that we can learn from each other as we're developing our awarenesses, to help couples come together. And then I guess, as Ilana says, how we need to work with injuries that people have experienced. I know when I go internationally, that oftentimes I'm working with an expat and someone native to that country that I'm in, and these cultural experiences of being left out, of being discriminated against, of leaving family, leaving culture, leaving community, are so big in the attachment frame. If we really hold that attachment frame, it will inform us so much about their emotional experience. And I found that very helpful when I'm working with the couple, to look at those bigger forces that then put more pressure on the couple to be more secure, because we need that secure base and that safe haven even more when we don't feel like we have. And so many of our trauma couples, so many of our couples really have that experience of, I just have you, and I'm not sure I even have you, right?
It's a critical source of resilience. Like it actually amplifies the need for a secure relationship. I mean, I wrote a little bit about that when I did the article with Sue on working with gay male couples. And it's like, the one thing I need in the world is a safe, secure relationship, because when I go out into the world, maybe not so much.
Right. I have to have that secure base to come back to, because it's dangerous out in the world.
Yeah.
It makes our work so meaningful and so important, doesn't it? So rewarding to help couples find each other and create that.
Yeah.
So, Robert, thank you so much for joining us and lending your expertise and your new research of what EFT therapists are doing that we can use as models and as guides, and that we are really working to be aware and inclusive, and watch our own blind spots and blocks so that we can be more open and more learning. It's really so cool.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Email me. My email's on the slide. So if people want to have any other questions, please feel free to email me.
Thank you. Thanks. And thanks all of you for joining Robert and I today, and for your comments and participation, and for the work that you're doing, and for your being with us as ISEF members. See you next time. If you go to Try EFT, the next one is up. The next trainer talk is up. Paul and Nancy Aiken will be joining me to talk about EFT with families and what they've learned from the family and teen program that they've been running that's helping in the couple therapy. Okay, thanks so much.
Awesome.
Bye now.